Crash test dummies. In the quest to create safer cars, researchers have subjected high-tech dummies to everything from head-on collisions to nasty side swipes. Most crash dummies are made from aluminum and vinyl. The typical dummy head weighs about 10 pounds. It is important to remember, in a typical car crash, because of the force of the accident, body parts may weigh 20 times more than normal. So a crash dummy head would weigh about 200 pounds at the time of the accident. In many cases, when dummies are involved in crashes, body parts are mangled and destroyed. This is why car manufacturers like General Motors stock up on extra dummy heads, spare arms, torsos, legs, and feet. In fact, some car companies have dummy hospitals where dummies go after a hard day of work to get fixed up. Dummies come in all shapes and sizes. You should note that the average 50% male dummy is 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighs 170 pounds. A typical female is about 5 feet tall and 110 pounds. They also make children dummies that match kids' ages of 6 months, 1, 3, and 6 years old. It is important to remember that each dummy has sensors called transducers that detect the amount of impact on the human body. Dummies are just like us. Their proportions exact. Their transducers are just like our nerves. They are often called injury measuring devices. Even though they are just machines, they look so much like us that it is upsetting to see them take our hits. They repeatedly crash dummies into walls to show what happened to us. General Motors engineers say that 30% of their crashes are to make sure that new cars meet federal safety regulations. The rest are to work the bugs out of prototype cars or prototype equipment. The purpose of saving lives can be costly. You should write this down. Each dummy costs nearly $100,000. Every year, General Motors performs about 500 car crashes on purpose. Other automobiles demolish their cars too, and some even use crash sleds to help researchers understand how cars can be made even safer. A new type of dummy has recently been developed called SID. An important fact about SID is that SID stands for Side Impact Dummy. SID is a specialist for examining sideways car crashes and car accidents. SID sensors measure the forces of a side crash on the human body. Not only do manufacturers use cars, but they also use these powerful sleds to see the impact of car accidents. They often use a sled called HYGE. HYGE stands for Hydraulic Controlled Gas Energized, which describes how the sled operates. A hydraulic ram shoots out from a 100-ton concrete block to give the sled a 3,000 pounds per square inch punch. In response, the sled accelerates down the 120-foot long rails and it rockets from 0 to 30 miles per hour in 1/600th of a second, about the blink of an eye. On a typical day, the car manufacturer is testing a new airbag for front and side crashes. As SID sits there awaiting its test, he's bathed in high-intensity light for the benefit of high-speed video cameras on the sidelines and the sled's 2 onboard movie cameras. SID actually looks like a screen actor on a set. Technicians do 3 main things to prepare SID for a crash. First, they check the lighting to make sure they can capture every image of the accident. 2, they apply red chalk makeup to SID's body. the red chalk makeup will leave marks where Sid's head and torso strike a simulated airbag. And 3, technicians use red laser beams to position the dummy. It must sit exactly in the same position, test after test. In one recent test, the sled is rigged with a car door and window. Nylon sacks represent the experimental airbag. Sid sits on a simulated seat sideways and awaiting the ram. During the setup, Sid sits peacefully, a thick umbilical cord of wires coming from the seat of its pants. During the crash, 30 continuous measurements of Sid's interior sensors will rush through a cable into a waiting computer. The computer will record the incoming stream of data 4,000 times during the 2/5 seconds that it takes for the accident to occur. On this day, Sid's feet have been removed because in previous tests they were stuck to the floor and slightly slowed the speed at which he rammed into the door. Also, Sid might feel deprived if he knew he had no arms, which often get in the way. Yet the designers did not omit the arms in their calculations of the impact. Once everything is ready, the set is cleared, and the red flashers signal that pressure is building in the ram. Technicians hurry behind the plexiglass shield as the ram's operator in the control booth above the concrete slab conducts the countdown. Wham! The sled rockets down the tracks and crashes. Sid jerks sideways. In the sled that is stopped down the track, Sid lies sprawled out with his head on the lab floor where it smacked. The researchers ignore Sid and instead race to the computer screen to view the video. They hover around the video screen for an instant replay. The researchers are studying the computer screen that displays the forces on Sid's body at impact. Eventually, they will note exactly where the red chalk from Sid's head and torso marked the airbag. As technology becomes better, dummies evolve just like animals have evolved. Their evolution has helped save lives. Test crash dummies have taught humans 2 important facts about car accidents. 1, wearing seatbelts reduces serious injury and death by 42%. And 2, adding airbags further reduces the death rate by another 10%. Early test crash dummies only measured front impacts. Today's dummies need to measure both front and side impacts, hence the use of SIDS. A typical dummy has steel ribs covered with vinyl graphite composite to simulate the response of human ribs to a hit from the side. In a crash, SID's sensors measure his sideways acceleration. SID is currently the federal standard for ensuring that new cars meet side impact crash regulations. One of the first side impact dummies was EuroSID from government labs in Europe. But U.S. automakers said that EuroSID's chest was too rigid. So GM researchers and engineers created BioSID. BioSID mimics the human body. BioSID's newer sensors and flexing body better portray what happens to the human body in a side collision. According to industry experts, SID's relatively crude instruments mainly reveal what a crash does to his bones. BioSID, on the other hand, can give a better reading on the overall risk of internal organ injuries. When looking back at how the first dummies were developed, technology has come a long way. You should know that the first modern instrumented dummies came along just after World War II as test pilot stand-ins. Often, these first test dummies had names like Parachute Man. That was in the late 1940s when jet fighters first appeared. Crash test dummies were needed to test ejection seats, but the early dummy designers had no knowledge of how to build a human replica. So early ejection seat dummies were basically steel barrels with limbs and heads. It was the auto industry, starting in the 1950s, that evolved and better designed how dummies were made. With the enactment of the National Highway Traffic Safety Act of 1966, dummy evolution took off. Now engineers were working on improving seatbelts and airbags, which often exerted complicated forces on the body. GM took the lead in 1971, creating Hybrid 1 dummy, which GM made available to the entire industry, a practice that continues today. By 1976, researchers had produced a sophisticated Hybrid 3, which will be the federal standard after September 1st, 1997. It is the most human-like dummy so far, with major exceptions. Hybrid 3 is a highly sensitive machine. Sensors in its neck move just like ours. In its steel graphite ribs, they deflect injuries just like ours. And on down to its lower legs, which measure everything from the impact on the pelvis to knee shear and impact on the tibia. All of the data from these sensors is instantly sent to computers in the lab. Something else you should record in your note. Safety engineers are now studying submarining. Submarining happens when you wear your lap belt too high and you slide under it at impact, possibly injuring your abdomen. To work out anti-submarining seatbelt designs, engineers gave Hybrid 3 a styrofoam abdomen insert that crushes and tells them the potential injuries to a human. Hybrid 3 is still evolving. For one thing, seatbelts and airbags have reduced fatalities and upper body injuries, with serious head injuries down substantially. So researchers are now looking at other dangers, like leg injuries. They're designing knee restraints, and these changes require more leg instruments and test crash dummies. Examining the damage to the human body has also advanced. In the early days, scientists used cadavers to see the impact of crashes. These days, bioengineers often visit trauma clinics to learn more from actual accident victims about what happened during their accidents. Cadavers are actually still used in research at universities today. One question that is often asked is, how do you make actual dummies? Well, at one technology plant in Michigan, a small workforce makes most of the world's crash test dummies, about 300 a year. They make them from steel, aluminum, and plastic goo. They x-ray the body parts to check the shape and density of the aluminum bones to make sure they don't break prematurely in a crash. Another important point to remember is that the skin is now made from liquid polyvinyl chloride plastic. After the plastic bakes into the skin with the correct thickness, they use grinders and hot irons to make it smooth. The bones of the neck are molded together with metal vertebrae separated by rubber disc. When finished, these dummies are actually shipped in coffin-like shipping boxes. Many dummies must undergo tests to make sure that they meet new federal standards. For those measurements to be accurate, each dummy sensor must be precisely calculated. That means that the dummies must regularly undergo nasty physicals that include pounding the chest with a 50-pound pendulum. Their knees get smashed with federally specified weights. They also have their heads dropped 14 inches to smack into a table to test sensors in the head. All of this is done to make sure that dummies are working correctly. Designers are also working on new airbags that unfurl from the chamber beneath the steering wheel. Designers are also working on a new airbag that unfurls from the chamber recessed below the steering wheel to prevent the driver's chest from coming too close. In one test crash, when the countdown reached 0, a dummy plunged toward the steering wheel at 12 miles per hour. Just before the dummy hits, the airbag housed in the steering wheel burst open, and the falling dummy is engulfed in a cloud of cornstarch. You should note that cornstarch is often used as a lubricant in airbags. Because of dummies, we are a safer society. In fact, they have already helped us. The number of deaths per mile of travel is now more than 90% lower than it was in 1922 due to government regulations, improved occupant protection, more crash-worthy cars, and of course, dummies played a large role in all of this. Eventually, dummies may actually lose their jobs. Engineers are now testing on-screen computers dummy that crash virtual cars in the cyber world. Despite being virtual or real, dummies have done a lot to improve safety and to save lives. This ends your lecture.